Let's go, Bob.
All right, today we're going to check over the answers to the questions in chapter 4 of your text. We had a number of questions to answer there for today. So if you're at home and haven't done that yet, stop the tape and go do that, and then come back and hear the answers. It's no fair hearing the answers and then doing the assignment. I'm sure you know that. Okay, chapter 4. First of all, we're looking at page 68, number 5. How did James Blair and Thomas Bray help establish Anglicanism in America? So how did they do that? Brady.
I said they provided better ministry.
They did what?
Provided better ministry.
What does that mean?
To the churches.
Okay, I'm not sure that's really telling me what they did. That's kind of the result of what they did, and the intention of what they did, but do you have anything about what they actually did? Okay, Lydia, what do you have?
I had Blair help secure better qualified ministers for the colonies, and Bray returned to promote missionary efforts in the colonies.
Okay, those are a little bit general, but they do specifically tell their activities. Does anybody have specifically how they brought those things about? Michaela?
I have for Blair that he founded William and Mary College.
Right, that was how he helped to prepare men for the ministry, by finding William and Mary College. How many of you had that? Okay, and none of you volunteered that information.
I didn't know Christian was on.
Okay, that's Sophia's excuse. What about the rest of you? And what about Bray? Did you have anything specific that Bray did? Devin?
He helped establish the Society for Promotion of Christian Knowledge and the Society for Propagation of the Gospel in Foreign Parts.
Right, so those are specific things that they did. All right, so you can either have at least what they did, and there are two things here, one for each of them, so you should have 2 things down there, 2 points for number 5. Any question about your answer, whether it was specific enough? All right, the next question we have is on page 71, looking at questions 1 through 4. Okay, first, what are the 3 most important English separatist groups to be established in the colonies? Give me one. Okay, Brady, reprieve.
Baptists.
The Baptists. Give me another one, Nate.
Quakers.
Right, and give me another one, Haley.
Baptist.
You already said Baptists. You only count once. Well, give me another one.
Presbyterian.
Presbyterians. That's the 3. Any question? 3 points. Number 2, who was most responsible for the founding of American Presbyterianism? Megan.
Francis McEnany.
Right. Any question? And how about American Lutheranism? Steph?
I had Martin Luther.
Not American. He would be Lutheranism in general. But who is responsible for American Lutheranism? Alex?
That's the only name I saw in the books. That's right.
Oh. Sarah?
Henry Muhlenberg.
Henry Muhlenberg. Yes. 2 points for number 2, 1 for each of those men. Any question? Number 3. Let's see. How is Pietism like Puritanism in its view of Christian living? We'll do that first part. How is Pietism like Puritanism? Hayden.
It emphasized the importance of conversion.
Yes, and you also could have said, added on to that, conversion, and Brady.
The necessity of a holy life.
Yes. You really ought to have both those things. I think that if you only have conversion, we should take half a point off because you haven't completely answered the question. Okay, they both emphasize the importance of conversion and the necessity of a holy life. All right, and then how is it unlike Puritanism in its view of doctrine? Sophia.
I have no idea. I didn't see that question.
Micah.
Downplay doctrine.
Right. Unlike the Puritans, the Pietists downplayed doctrine, didn't think doctrine was important.
I said it's more emotional based.
That is probably true, although that is not really the emphasis. So I'm going to take off half a point. You really need to have the idea that they downplayed doctrine. They didn't think doctrine was important. They may or may not have been more emotional, depending on the individual people, because sometimes the Puritans can be emotional too. All right, any questions? So there's 2 points on number 3. Number 4, where was the center of colonial Catholicism? Man, if we haven't said this enough by now, you ought to be able to say it in your sleep. Jessica?
Maryland.
Maryland, my Maryland. All right, any questions? Okay, so we have 8 points there. We had, what, 2 points on the other page? Now, page 74. So we have 10 points altogether so far. Page 74, you had to do 1 through 3. Number 1, what is a catechism? Stephen?
A summary of a denomination's doctrine framed in a question and answer form.
That is exactly right.
I'm always exactly right.
That's not exactly right. Okay, any question about your answer? And let's see, did we learn, yeah, we learned parts of the Westminster Catechism last year in Bible class, so you know what that's like. Do any of your churches use a catechism at all? Any of you have, okay. I know a couple churches that I've heard of that have instruction for children or young people in which they use a catechism question and answer. Number 2, what was the first book published in America? Nate?
The Bay Psalms book.
Yes, no S on the end. The Bay Psalm book. That is correct. Interesting, the first book they published was a book of Psalms to read. They called it the Bay Psalm book because they looked at it as we're going to sing an individual psalm, I suppose. Any questions? All right, number 3, why did many colonial churches lack musical instruments? You can have one of several answers here. Give me one, Caleb.
Because some thought that it went against the Bible.
Yeah, they thought that the Bible forbade using the musical instruments because they didn't see it in the New Testament. What's another reason, Lydia?
Others couldn't afford to import them from Europe.
Right, they were expensive to import because nobody made them here. Okay, any question? 2 possible answers there, you only need 1. All right, so that gives us 13 points altogether to this point. Next is page 76, numbers 1 through 3. Who was the Swedish Lutheran who ministered among the Delaware Indians? Who was that? Lahana.
John Campion?
That's close. Anybody want to give a shot at his last name? Michaela, you want to try it?
John Campanius?
That sounds pretty good. John Campanius, or Campanius. Not sure. Pretty sure it's not Campanius. Just throw that out there. Any question? Number 2. 2 means that John Eliot used to evangelize the Algonquin Indians. And there are several you could have had here. You could have more than 2. Give me one, Hayden.
Translated the Bible to the Algonquin language.
That's correct. All right, that's one thing he did. What else, Lydia?
He learned their language.
He learned their language. You had to do that before he could translate it, right? So that's, you could have that. Megan, do you have another one?
Translated devotions.
Translated devotional works, also into Algonquin. Okay, anything else? Michaela?
That he just preached to them.
He preached, yeah. So that was an important thing. Anything else? He also helped to found the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel in New England. So any 2 of those. So 2 points for number 2. Any question about any of your answers? All right, number 3. The name of the most successful Moravian Indian mission. Lahana. This is, I call on you because I had confidence that you might be able to closely approximate it because I mispronounced it for many, many years until I found out how to really do it. So give it a shot if you don't mind. Okay, that's close. Anybody else want to try? See if anybody gets it. Hayden?
Gnadenhutten?
Okay, anybody else want to try? Michaela?
Not
That, I thought for many, many years, is just reading it, that the G must be silent, because you can't have a G and an N together, right? I found out when I actually visited the place that it's not silent. They pronounce it, if I remember right, Gnadenhutten. Gnadenhutten or Gnadenhutten. Now I can't remember which one it is. But they put the G in the end both there. Gnadenhutten. Something like that. Okay, so good try, everybody. I wanted to see if you could do it. The second part is, what does this name mean? That's the important thing. All right, so Lahani, you come back and tell us, what does it mean?
Sheltered by grace.
That is correct. Any question? All right, 2 points on number 3. Let's see, we had was it 13 before this page? So I have 18 points altogether. So if you will count how many you missed, put the number at the top of your page and circle it. I will collect it and record it at a later date. And so when you're finished with that, pass them up. Anybody get them all right? Anybody get them 100%? All right, wow, quite a few of you. That's good. Steven, is your hand up for a reason?
Yeah, it was still 100%.
Oh, okay, you just left it up longer than everybody so we all could see it. Make sure, in case we missed it, looking over this way, we could see it looking over your direction. I like your presentation. All right, open your notes now. We're going to move into a different topic within the area of the religion of the colonies. And that is, we're going to be looking at an exciting time called the First Great Awakening. Find that in your notes. Should be right after where we have just been. Anybody can't find it? First Great Awakening. Okay, it looks like everybody is there. Okay, first we want to get a little bit of an overview of the awakenings in America. The First Great Awakening is the first of a number of awakenings that have taken place in the United States. I've studied a lot of these. There are a lot of similarities. There are some differences as well. This first time period from 1726 through the late 18th century is a time when awakening took place from pastoral evangelists. In other words, it was primarily instigated, promoted, brought about through pastors preaching. All right, then when we come to the Second Great Awakening later on, we'll see that there are individual evangelists. There are pastors involved too, but more people that are see themselves as evangelists and going maybe from place to place. Following the Second Great Awakening, we have Finney's revival. We'll be looking at Charles Finney. How many have ever heard of Charles Finney? Okay, only maybe one person. All right, well, you're going to hear about him later. Then we come to something called the Layman's Prayer Revival. And then following that, there were lay evangelists, that is, people that were not ordained ministers who were evangelizing. Some things we won't get to the era of great evangelists that may be covered in U.S. History 2 with Mr. Chapin. And there you have team evangelists. So these are teams of people that are evangelizing. And that brings us down to the era of Billy Graham, considered the greatest modern day evangelist. And following with him, and then we have association evangelists. There are other people that work with him and continue to carry on the Billy Graham ministry. All right, so this is the beginning of awakenings. If we went further than this, I would include one other awakening, and that is what took place in the early 1970s among young people, called the Jesus People movement. If you talk to your grandparents, they may remember something of that. I think that rises to the level of a nationwide movement of God among young people, certainly. And a lot of changes took place in this country as a result of it. Okay, so we're looking at the first one, which of course wasn't called the First Great Awakening until there was a second one. Until then it was called the Great Awakening. Just like World War I wasn't called World War I at the time. It was called the Great War, but then we had a second one, then went back and called it World War I. All right, so we're looking at the First Great Awakening. And the first question we have to answer is, what was it? So I'm going to give you a definition of the First Great Awakening. As soon as I bring the right notes. Oh, there it is. All right, definition. The awakening was a mighty moving of the Holy Spirit in the hearts of men, resulting in regeneration. Okay, so as we get that down, we'll talk about it, make sure we understand what it's saying. What does it mean? A mighty moving of the Holy Spirit in the hearts of men, resulting in regeneration. All right, first I want you to shake your heads. Is that statement clear to you? Shake it, yes or no? What is that? Okay, I guess that's what that indicates. Okay, Hayden's not sure, so it wasn't a no, definitely no, but and Micah. So the sideways bobblehead effect. Okay, so let's talk briefly about it then. What does it mean, a mighty moving of the Holy Spirit? Why do we say that in relationship to an awakening? Why do we qualify it with that terminology? It's a mighty moving of the Holy Spirit. Could you have an awakening without the Holy Spirit moving? No. Why? Okay, Michaela? I'm going to start going something else. Michaela?
Because the Holy Spirit is all about Holy Spirit that change.
Right, because notice it's moving in the hearts of men. And what's the result of the Holy Spirit moving in the hearts of men? Regeneration. What does that mean? We could equate that with salvation. What happens in regeneration? What does the word indicate? Are we not familiar with this word? This key word in Christianity? Stephen?
Becoming new.
It's becoming new, becoming alive, actually. Regeneration is being made alive. So the Holy Spirit makes a person alive spiritually before they were spiritually dead. So the definition of an awakening is when the Holy Spirit moves in the hearts of men, resulting in regeneration. People actually are changed in the inside. They're changed spiritually. They become alive spiritually. Now that is a definition that eliminates some movements which may not be the Holy Spirit, but maybe simply men doing things. All right, so we need to make sure that what we're seeing when we see what may be an awakening, that it's the Holy Spirit that's working, and that may not always be easy to determine. All right, so let's look at this further. We're going to break it down into where it began and then where it continues. It began in the Middle Colonies, where it was initially the work of the Dutch Reformed Church. but usually it's designated as the Presbyterian phase since that group largely carried it on. So it begins with a pastor, a minister who is Dutch Reformed, but primarily in the Middle Colonies, it's the Presbyterians that carry it on. Next, it spread to New England, where it is called the Congregational phase, because it was largely in the Congregational church, which is the church that came out of what group of people? The Congregational church, formerly were called what? Who became the Congregational church? Who became known as the Congregational church? No. In New England. Who was it that largely populated New England? What religious group largely populated New England? Who would it be? We only spent the last month or so studying them. The Puritans. The Puritans, as I've told you before, then became known as the Congregational church. They're not called the Puritan church, they're called the Congregational church. And it's largely in the Congregational church that this awakening continues in New England colonies. And then from there it moves to the south, where it's usually designated as the Baptist and Methodist phase, because those are the denominations that are most largely associated with what occurs in the south. Okay, so there are three phases, and we need to remember this. It begins in the Middle Colonies. That's called the Presbyterian phase, and that's going to be brought about, carried on by what's called the Law College Revivalists, and you'll find out more about them later. Phase 2 is New England, the Congregational phase, and this is carried on by college-trained revivalists. Phase 3 is the South. That's the Baptist and Methodist phase, and that is largely carried out by farmer preachers and lay preachers. So these are not as formally trained as you find here and here. All right, those are the three phases, and we'll spend time going through each one of them. All right, so that is what the awakening is. Now, the next question is, why was it necessary? What was the need of an awakening? And I'm going to give you a number of things that were true, which demonstrate that awakening was needed. And as we go through them, I would like you to evaluate if there are any similarities to America then and America now, and see if we need awakening today. Okay, first of all, and I'm using the word destabilization as an overall theme. What's it mean to be destabilized? Or what is destabilization? What do you think, Stephen?
Off track.
Off track? Okay, any other words you can think of? If you stabilize something, what are you doing? Making it stronger so that it can stand on its own. So if something is destabilized, it's no longer steady, no longer functioning properly. Can you think of an example of something that you know of that is maybe could be described as being destabilized? I know we don't use that word, but if the foundation of your house has a crack in it from an earthquake, we could say that it's destabilized, right? It's no longer sturdy enough to maybe hold up the house, and it needs to be fixed.
The basketball hoop on the playground before they fixed it.
Okay, good. The basketball hoop was destabilized. It couldn't function right because it was wobbling and whatever, right? Had to be, what was it?
It was like leaning over.
Leaning over. Yeah. Okay, that's a good example. Any others? Okay, we're going to look at some different ways in which society was destabilized and indicating a need for awakening. First is destabilization spiritually. And we've mentioned this before, the impact of wealth, but an increase in wealth in the colonies focused attention on materialistic needs. I don't know if you've observed this or not, but doesn't it seem that the more people have, the less they think about God? You know, people have a tendency just to start looking at riches and getting more material things and more, and less on God. And that happened in the colonies. People that came here really focused on God. They came here for religious freedom, many of them. But as the generations went on and they became more prosperous, they lost sight of what their true focus should have been. And as a result of that, indication of this destabilization spiritually was that immorality was evident and religious devotion was diminishing. Cotton Mather said this: national righteousness is the mother of national prosperity. Okay, what do you mean by that? That if a people are acting righteously, if people are following God, the natural result of that is that you're going to be prosperous. Because you're doing the things that really work, that they're realistic in society, and you're going to become more prosperous if you're living righteously. That's just a natural result. Now, not every individual, but in general, that's true. You know, if you follow the book of Proverbs, you are going to be more successful than someone who doesn't. I've even heard of people that weren't Christians that said that they follow the book of Proverbs because it works. Not because they believe it's from God, but because it works. He goes on to say, I'm going to start again. National righteousness is the mother of national prosperity. You follow that so far? Then he said, but now prosperity has devoured its mother. What's he saying? That it was the righteousness of the people that came here that brought about prosperity. But now prosperity has devoured its mother. It's eaten up its mother. It's eaten up righteousness. Righteousness is no longer. Jonathan Edwards, whom we're going to study, said this: just after my grandfather's death, it seemed to be a time of extraordinary dullness in religion. Licentiousness, looseness, for some years greatly prevailed among the youth of the town. They were, many of them, much addicted to night walking, just wandering around at night, and frequently frequenting the tavern and lewd practices, wherein some by their example exceedingly corrupted others. Indeed, family government did too much fail in the town. Parents lost control of their kids. In reality, churches were few and church members a fraction of the population. Even after the awakening, membership in New England was 12.5%, in the Middle Colonies 6.6%, and in the Southern Colonies 5%. Overall church attendance after the awakening was 8.3%. So even after the awakening, it wasn't all that great. But before the awakening, it was dismal. Well, tomorrow we'll go on to find out more about the destabilization spiritual. Oh no, we have some more time. I looked at the clock wrong. So we'll continue. Don't pause that. Okay, the unstabilizing effect of transplanting a society in a backward environment resulted in less educated and less refined people. In other words, people who are moving out into frontier areas, living more on their own, meant that they're going to be less educated. They just weren't near schools. Less refined, you know, and their manners weren't what they could have been. One historian, Sweet, says this, that's his name, is Sweet. The vast labor and the rough, uncouth hardships which of necessity accompany pioneering in every new land will inevitably react upon the people themselves and result in an uncouth and partially wild society. So when you live in a wild environment, you become more wild. I don't know if any of you have ever experienced that or not. Have you ever gone camping or hiking out away from civilization for a while? Your manners tend to slip a little bit. Anybody ever done that? You know, especially guys. You know, we don't worry about finding a porta potty, right? And you don't worry about eating with the utensils just right. So, this is what happens when you're in a frontier area. All right, so that's destabilization spiritually. Any questions? Let me ask you this. America today, do you see destabilization spiritually? I just read a couple days ago the results of a survey. It's called The State of Theology in 2018. I wish I had a copy of it here. I could share some with you. But among evangelical Christians, people who are Bible-believing Christians, their beliefs have continued to deteriorate over the years. So that there is a large percentage, and without looking, I can't tell you what it is, a large percentage of Bible-believing Christians who believe that Jesus isn't the only way, who believe that Muslims, Mormons, whatever, they all have their way. These are people who say they believe in the Bible. There was a disturbing percentage of people who weren't sure that Jesus was actually God. Again, Bible-believing people. And then when you look at the country as a whole, unbelievers included, of course it's much worse, a lack of belief that there is punishment. People want to believe in heaven but not in hell. And that's true among believers too. I'll bring up that and show it to you tomorrow, but definitely we are destabilizing spiritually in our country. The churches in America, churches that are not Bible believing are taking a nosedive, have been for a number of years. They're losing people like crazy because they've got nothing to offer. A lot of those churches are combining together to try to survive. But even among evangelical Bible believing churches, we're not growing. In the last 30, 40 years, we're just maintaining. People are dying, and we're just replacing them. Churches are not growing. Oh, there may be individual churches that are growing, but mostly it's at the expense of smaller churches that are closing down. And all we're doing is switching people from one to another. Evangelism is not really taking place to a large extent. All right, so destabilization spiritually. Next, destabilization politically. It was England's determination to centralize the government of the colonies, which caused great political concern. We saw that already in Massachusetts. Massachusetts lost its charter in 1684. England's trying to gain more and more control over the colonies all of a sudden. Sir Edmund Andros became governor of the Dominion of New England, which included New York and all of the Northeast. Andros had Anglican sympathies as well as Unitarian Arminian influences. So he was not on the same end of the scale of doctrine that the Puritans were. He was on the opposite end. As William and Mary ascended the throne in England, what's called the Glorious Revolution or the Bloodless Revolution, the colonies rebelled against Andros, sending him back to England. The colonies hoped for the restoration of their original charters. They could go back to governing themselves like they had been before. But instead, the colonies fell under the crown, under the control of the king, which was a serious blow to Puritan church-state relations. Because remember, for the Puritans, it was important that the government and the church be working together. Well, now, being under the control of England, that's no longer possible. And you can see a precursor to what's going to happen in the 18th century as we eventually come to the point of war for independence. It begins here with England taking over the political situation. So there's destabilization politically. People are uncertain about what's going to happen politically. Do we see that today in our country? Is there destabilization politically? Can you see in the last couple of years what's happening politically in our country? Especially this last presidential election and what's been going on since is bringing out what's been underlying all along. And it's creating hatred between people. It's creating a lot of accusations of one kind or another. You can see that there's a real polarization in America. And so things are really unsettled. You know, when one political party is advocating riots and harassing people, getting people thrown out of restaurants because they don't happen to agree with them politically, we've reached the point of destabilization politically. Any comments or questions? Next, there is destabilization emotionally. And some of this was the result of intermittent Indian wars, which harassed the settlers. There was the Pequot War in 1637, King Philip's War, which you read about in 1672, King William's War, 1689 to 1697, Queen Anne's War, 1701 to 1713. One author has said, their contacts with wild Indians were demoralizing influences upon American colonial character. Living in contact with savages, white people seldom fail to acquire the worst vices of tyrants. That comes from Mr. Sweet. All right, so emotionally, people are in turmoil. They are afraid about the next Indian attack. Some of them are becoming associated so close with the Indians, they're adopting some of their religious practices. So there's destabilization emotionally. What about our country? Would you say that emotionally our country is destabilized, uncertain, unsteady? Are people experiencing emotional highs and lows, or even depression over what's happening? Not sure about what's going to happen next. You know, we have one political party that's crying out about how they're afraid that their voting rights will be taken away, and that women won't be able to get abortions, and the other side crying out in fear that the other party gets control, that we'll have abortions all over the place, and drugs and all that. So we're definitely experiencing that as well. Well, we'll continue to find out the causes, the need for a Great Awakening tomorrow. Preparation for that, I want you to read pages 77 to 82 and do the section review on page 82. Yeah.